Hey everyone, welcome to a special SEC tournament edition of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, before we get into what's going on with the tournament right now and previewing some of the games, wanted to hit you up on some NFL news that we got for our audience. Uh, First one being we talked about it last week. There's a lot of intrigue as to where certain quarterbacks are going. I saw that Russell Wilson is now going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, which is one of the places we said would be a possibility. Kirk Cousins going to be a Falcon, and I saw that Jimmy Garoppolo got released by the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, a big frenzy the last couple of days with the NFL. The start of free agency, they do it like nobody else as far as grabbing your attention. And also, I'm intrigued to see how these quarterbacks do in their new destinations. Kirk Cousins was having maybe one of his best seasons until he got hurt last year. I think he had like 18 touchdowns through maybe like 10 games. Like he was on a really good pace. And the Falcons are an intriguing team because they're a young roster that many view as maybe a quarterback away from being a playoff contender, especially with how wide open the NFC feels, with the exception of San Francisco and Philadelphia.
Well, and Joe, especially considering how bad the NFC South was last year. I mean, you had a 9-7 Bucks team that was the winner of the division. Uh,
Yeah,
the Saints still seem to be a work in progress with very little offense. The Bucks, I guess they ended up holding on to Baker Mayfield. I didn't really hear anything about that. In kind of a resurgent season for him. But the Bucks weren't a great team by any means. They were a very good defense with a very average offense. Um, you look at the Falcons roster, they got a really solid young running back in Bijan Robinson, killer young tight end and Kyle Pitts. Drake London is a very talented wide receiver. There's a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. And, one thing about Kirk Cousins, he's never been a bad quarterback. He's always been middle to good middle. I mean, that's kind of been his thing the entire time he's been in the NFL.
yeah,
And that last year probably would have put the Falcons in the playoffs, just having that.
yeah. That's true. I mean, he's going to a very good situation for him at this stage of his career. The only issue is I kind of feel like he's leaving a pretty good situation in Minnesota as well. But I'm also surprised with you have him, clearing the way in Minnesota for quarterback that they didn't target Russell Wilson as we had
Mm-hmm.
talked about last week. Instead, Russell Wilson goes to Pittsburgh on a very economical contract, of course, because Denver's covering most of his salary. But I personally feel like he would have enjoyed the opportunity better in Minnesota.
Well, I think so too. I mean, you and I talked about it. The Vikings really were a team that was, just this close to being a team that would not only be in the playoffs, but maybe win a game or two in the playoffs. That's also a really solid roster that has even better wide receivers than what you see with the Falcons with Justin Jefferson and Thielen and company. Um,
Yeah, that's the way I view it. Like I feel like Minnesota is the right quarterback fit away from maybe being a NFC championship caliber team, or at least making it to the NFC championship game. Whereas I feel like Atlanta is still maybe a year or two away where they could be kind of a feel good, let's make the playoffs, build on that kind of thing. But the window is going to take a little bit longer.
Yeah, one thing I'll say though about Russell Wilson going to the Steelers, it's a very stable program. They like Mike Tomlin. They've had some highs with him. They've won a Super Bowl. They've had some lows where they didn't make the playoffs. But most of the time they make the playoffs and they usually win a game. And they've believed in him. They've loved his system and they haven't gone away from him, even when it hasn't been as great lately. And Mike Tomlin is also someone who you see let quarterbacks play for a long time. I mean, look at how long they gave Ben Roethlisberger, who, I mean, that was a great quarterback for the Steelers, won multiple Super Bowls, but he lost a lot in his last 5 years as a quarterback, and they let him do it. And that's kind of the way that Pittsburgh is. I mean, they're very cautious. They don't make rash decisions. And you got to think if you're Russell Wilson right now, you just had this really tumultuous experience where you left Seattle You went to the Broncos and you thought that it really would work out with Sean Payton being there, and it was a terrible fit from day one. Got pretty vicious out there in the media, and I think an attractive, very stable, conservative coaching staff and general manager room might be something that would appeal to him.
Yeah, he may be looking for that type of situation, with a franchise that's won at such a high level for a long time. And Mike Tomlin now, I guess, is the longest tenured coach in the NFL. I think even longer than John Harbaugh at Baltimore. And speaking of Baltimore, I have to throw in, I'm very intrigued by Derrick Henry to the Ravens. I
Ooh.
think that really helps Lamar Jackson, because I feel like one issue I had with the Ravens last year, and I feel like this keeps hurting them in the playoffs, is their best running back last year was Gus Edwards. J.K. Dobbins has not been as good recently, had some injuries. And I feel like there's been too much pressure on Lamar Jackson to create with his legs. And I feel like getting Derrick Henry helps alleviate some of that pressure in the red zone. And I feel like, that puts a lot of possibilities here for the Ravens to maybe capitalize.
I think that's a great move. I mean, who's gonna complement a quarterback with Jackson's skill set better than Big Derrick Henry, who can handle 25, 30 carries in a game. And that was the problem he was having with the Titans. And now you pair him with a quarterback who's very mobile, who's going to, probably take 10 to 15 rushes a game himself. And that's going to improve the longevity of Derrick Henry. And it's going to be great in the second half, too, because Henry won't have all the carries that he had in the first half, and he can really hit teams hard in the second half. I mean, I think that's great for the style of offense that the Ravens run.
Yeah, it gives both of them at this stage in their career like the alleviation they need in order for them to have their peak performance. Like neither one of them is going to be overly worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a great pickup. Something else I saw too, which this was a long time coming and a lot of money burned. I saw that the Saints finally released Michael Thomas.
Yeah, that I mean, you kind of had to move on. It's unfortunate it didn't work out. It's almost like he could only coexist with Drew Brees as his quarterback. Like you saw, like anytime he wasn't there, it seemed like it just didn't work out.
Well, and I feel like, it might have been a little bit of a Tebow and Riley Cooper type thing where it seems like Thomas has got a little bit of an anger problem and a really intense personality. And you've seen that based on some of the off field issues he's had and some of the stuff he's done on the sidelines. And maybe the calming presence of Drew Brees helped him a lot with that. And without having Drew Brees there, just couldn't really, maybe psychologically, he couldn't really get it right.
Well, that makes me think about one other thing. A lot of people have said before that with New England, with Tom Brady, that, Bill Belichick with his preparation was super intense. And you had to have Tom Brady with his kind of, a little bit more laid back at times personality to kind of help everybody else weather that storm. And you kind of wonder with what you've seen with Belichick, is it similar with Sean Payton? Did Drew Brees kind of, help alleviate that as well? And that's one reason it, did not work out well for Sean Payton his last year in New Orleans and now his first year in Denver.
Yeah, I mean, maybe so. I mean, you know, Russell Wilson's a very together person. Has always been a really smart quarterback. But maybe he's not
You're
quite as
not used to
calm.
it.
Yeah, he just wasn't used to him. And meanwhile, Drew Brees is just able to be tough enough to deal with what that is and, be the leader that he is. And maybe that's what they needed. And, Drew Brees had a lot of volatile personalities that seemed to play well under him. So I think that could very well be what it is.
Yeah, it's interesting when you remove some players, different dynamics. It's crazy how it plays out.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the way that Brady was trying to help out too. What was the name of the Steelers wide receiver that was so good, but kind of
Antonio Brown.
Antonio Brown. Even there, you saw Antonio Brown kind of live with Tom Brady, so that Tom Brady could kind of keep him in line, and maybe that's kind of more or less what Michael Thomas needed.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a strong possibility.
Well, Joe, switching away from football, a lot of great stories in free agency, but the SEC basketball tournament, quite a great start to it. I watched the Arkansas and Vanderbilt game, and it really came down to the wire. I mean, I thought Vanderbilt obviously had the big advantage being that they're playing in Nashville. And I wasn't sure what Arkansas team would be there because Arkansas is the most disappointing team in the SEC. Of course, they were coming off back-to-back Elite Eights. I think they were the preseason pick to win the SEC, if I'm not mistaken. And they've had just a horrid season. I mean, going into that game, they were sub 500, 6-12 in the league. And this game really went down to it in overtime. Dramatic last second shot by Vanderbilt's point guard, who put up 27 points to get it there. And then Arkansas pulled it out in OT. And Joe, you and I were briefly chatting about it before the show. Arkansas, in my mind, could very well be the first team. If there was ever going to be a team to do it, it might be Arkansas to actually win five. Be in the first day of the SEC tournament and win 5 games and be able to win the SEC tournament.
Yeah, that's true. They have as good a chance as anybody because most of these teams that you watch that play on this first night of the four, it's usually 4 teams that are just very average talent. And when you look at Arkansas, yes, they've had a disappointing season, but the talent is there. And so if they could get hot, you feel like they could win 2 or 3 games.
I mean, absolutely. Brazil, really excellent player. Makai Mitchell, someone who's been there for 5 years. Musselman, I think you talked about this earlier this year that he's playing for his job right now because Arkansas basketball is among the more consistent basketball programs we have in the SEC. They've won a national championship before, and he might be a little bit of a victim of his own success because they can't believe they're sitting there with almost zero chance to make the NCAA tournament now, sans a great run through the SEC tournament and winning it all.
Well, I would speculate that with their football team struggles, I feel like they've gone more all in on basketball the last couple of years with NIL. And so I think you've got some upset boosters, that are not seeing their investment paying off. I think that has a lot to do with it too.
Well, and you also got to think too that Musselman's got such a brash personality that that's all well and good when you're winning games, but if you have that kind of personality and you're not very good, you're going to really take some people off.
Yeah, just everything that he says is under the microscope now. And so, and like I told you, that whether it happens or not, the Louisville rumors have been real from what I understand. And so there's a lot of distractions for this team. And so we'll see how they do. I think a deep run is very important for the stability of that program.
Yeah, I think it is 100%. I mean, I think it's essential to Musselman's career if he is wanting to stay in Arkansas. Um, that Louisville job is quite a specter. I mean, I've heard a lot of word that Nate Oates is someone that's being heavily considered by Louisville too. I don't know whether he would leave to take that job or not. I mean, I think he's got a great thing going in Alabama, but I have heard that Louisville is very interested in him also.
Yeah, it's hard to believe anybody would be that interested in Louisville right now. It's hard to believe. I think they're 8-23 this year. It just does not seem the desirable job that it once was 5 or 6 years ago.
No, I think they've been hurt heavily by NIL. And they would have been one of the ones that I thought probably would have, benefited a lot from it with it being such a big marketplace with I'm sure some alums that have a lot of money, but it just hasn't really worked out.
Yeah, they were one of those like all around good athletic programs for a while.
I mean, they were good at football, baseball, and basketball all together at one point.
Yep.
But yeah, so it's going to be an interesting story to watch Arkansas. They're going to get to take on South Carolina tomorrow, and as good as South Carolina has been, they're not a team that I really believe in. I mean, I watched Auburn beat them by 40 points. When South Carolina's played the better teams in the SEC, lately they haven't been able to really get the dubs. Now, early in the season, they had the shocking upset of Kentucky and Tennessee, but down the stretch, they've done good against the poor teams, but haven't really got it done against the best of the best in the SEC.
They feel like one of those teams that has just kind of had a great season, but because they're somewhat in our uncharted territory as a program, having this much success in the regular season, you just kind of feel like they're ripe for an upset. Like, I think when the bracket comes out, I'll probably pick them to lose, at the very least in the round of 32.
Yeah, I mean, right now they're listed as a 5 seed in the tournament. 12-5 is always a really, sharp pick for an upset. That might be one that I'll look at taking them out in the first round.
Yeah, just kind of an underachieving, overachieving team that just kind of played, beyond their potential.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. They are an overachieving team. otherwise from the first four, I don't see any teams that have a really chance to make a good run. Like I said, Arkansas would be the only one that I could see doing it. Missouri, the only drama tonight is whether they get any wins at all in the SEC season, which, God, that would be sad if you went an entire season without winning a game, including the tournament. Um, and I also think that what would be interesting too is that nobody wants them to win that game because a Kentucky Georgia second round matchup is quite appealing with not only the great rivalry that you see between Kentucky and Georgia and everything, or not Kentucky and Georgia, sorry, Georgia and Florida and everything, but of course the fact that Mike White, either was forced out of Florida and went to Georgia or left to go to Georgia on his own terms.
I think he kind of was forced to go to Georgia, and it was just kind of like a job that was available. But you're right, you have the history there with his previous coaching stop. But Florida's got a good situation now. I think that Todd Golden's one of the best young coaches in the business.
He's only 39 years old, and I mean, Florida's a very excellent team, and that's a team that, while I think South Carolina is going to go out early in the NCAA tournament, I could see Florida making a pretty deep run.
Yeah, they're very talented.
Um, so looking, moving on, you go to the second round matchups. Ole Miss and A&M. That's an interesting game because A&M right now is listed as the first team out of the NCAA tournament, and I would think that they probably would have to win two games to get in. Ole Miss has gone into such a tailspin lately that I don't know that beating Ole Miss is enough to push you through if you're A&M, especially because you think about the history that Buzz Williams has with the NCAA tournament committee, with them repeatedly snubbing him over and over again and him commenting on it. You kind of think they just kind of have it out for him. So I would say if you're A&M, I wouldn't feel good about being in unless you beat Ole Miss and Kentucky.
Yeah, I think you have to. In Kentucky, that's an uphill battle. But yeah, Ole Miss being the 10 seed and just, I mean, let's put it in perspective. Since I can't remember what date it was in February, but Ole Miss went from 5-3 in the SEC. They finished 7-11. Their only two wins in that span were against Missouri.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody beat Missouri. They never won a game the entire season in the SEC. Rough end of the season for Chris Beard. It's his first season, and there's a lot of Ole Miss fans that are worried about Beard leaving. I keep, hearing all these messages that he's here to stay and he's putting it out there, but I never really believe those things until it's time. But I think that if he chooses to stay at Ole Miss, which I think he will, uh, he's gonna get Ole Miss there eventually. He's just too good of a coach.
Yeah, I mean, won 20 games in year one. I mean, that if you look at it that way, if you told me before the season he's 7-11, it's not that bad. I
No,
think that it's just how the season played out is what's disappointing. And then the other thing is, I think give him more of an entire offseason where he can actually really go out and bring in the players he wants from the transfer portal. Whereas this year he was kind of just stuck with whoever was left.
yeah. I mean, he went out and he got the transfer from Auburn that had been so good for a long time.
Flanagan.
Yeah, he got Alan Flanagan. That was a good pickup. But other than that, it was pretty much, it
You
just
got you got like Jamarian Sharp from Western Kentucky, but like he wasn't able to get people from like big time programs, and so I just think it was slim pickings too. He was hired this time last year, and so it was just a lot of
yeah.
people had already decided what they were going to do.
Yeah, it just wasn't, great timing from this year. I feel like you're right. If it had been a different situation where maybe they didn't go undefeated in the non-conference and maybe they lost a couple games and then, it was a little bit more sporadic, like, winning a couple here and there in the SEC and not going on that run at the end where all they beat was Missouri, I think you feel a little better about it. But still, I mean, that's not a bad first season, especially as good as the league has been this year.
Yeah, and he was 6-12, I think, his first year in the Big 12 at Texas Tech, and he definitely turned that around.
Well, he turned that around quick. So I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about if you're an Ole Miss fan. But this is definitely not the year. I don't see Ole Miss making any kind of run in the SEC tournament. A&M's not a great team by any means, but I definitely think that I would give A&M the edge in that.
Oh yeah, I think easily.
I'll tell you another interesting one here is what Mississippi State needs to do. Because Mississippi State right now is listed as the 11 seed, and they are in the NCAA tournament. They're taking on 8 seeded LSU, who I would say LSU's probably exceeded expectations this year. Um, especially with all of the NCAA problems they had to do and what a mess their coach from McNeese State inherited there. But I think Mississippi State is, they need to win that game for sure and probably look good doing it. I think as long as they beat LSU by like 10 points or more, they're probably fine because they're not going to beat Tennessee. And I don't think that's a contingent thing for them to make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, they've got to beat LSU. Or if you're on that 11 line, you're almost stuck having to play in Dayton. In the early games, and so it's dangerous territory. The tough thing for both A&M and State is that they've got winnable, obviously, first round games, but then they've got a Goliath of the matchup against Tennessee or Kentucky. You almost wish if you're them, obviously, that you were seated like 6 or 7 on the bubble where you'd have a more winnable second game.
Yeah, those second games for both of them are absolutely brutal. So I'm not really liking their chances. I think that Mississippi State can probably get in by only beating LSU, but with them not having great name recognition, uh, I guess their best win of the season is they beat Auburn at home earlier in the year. Um,
They can't lose by 30 to Tennessee. Like they've got to look
no,
respectable in that game.
they got look good. I'm saying there's a chance the team could jump them that's on the bubble right
Yeah,
now with just beating LSU. So if you want to feel really good about being in the tournament, you got to beat both of them, and then there's no question. But I think that it's going to be interesting. And you're right. If Tennessee goes out and just boat races them, then beating LSU might not be enough.
yeah. You'll have some other team in another conference that'll make it like their semifinals or championship game, and they'll get in.
Yeah. I'll tell you what's interesting to me is, Florida right now is a team that can make a deep run. They have a pretty favorable setup because they're going to get to take on either Missouri or Georgia. I think an Alabama Florida game will be quite interesting because Florida right now is listed as a 6 seed, I think, in the NCAA tournament. There's a lot of upper mobility they have, and they just beat Alabama by I think 25 points last week. So Florida looks like a team that could very easily make at least the semifinals of the SEC tournament.
Yeah, and that'd be a good spot to be in. Sometimes it's not as bad as obviously baseball when you burn all your pitching, but sometimes it's not bad to go out in the semifinals, get an extra day of rest, and then be on cruise control for the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes getting a little bit of that momentum is good. I mean, the year that Auburn made the Final Four, they won the SEC tournament. That was what propelled them. So I think that basketball can be a different situation. And, you see teams like Auburn 2 years ago where they were the number one overall seed for a long time, kind of flubbed at the end of the season. They went out in the first round of the SEC tournament and they subsequently lost in the second round of the tournament to Miami in a huge upset. So I think it's good to do a little bit, at least in the SEC tournament. I mean, winning it's great, but I think making a run is a good thing.
Yeah, it's just great to be in a spot where you don't feel like you have to do it. Like that's the nightmare for these teams that are obviously on the bubble.
Right. I mean, um, I think Auburn and South Carolina, is or either Auburn and South Carolina, Auburn, Arkansas. I like Auburn, whether it's going to be Arkansas or South Carolina they take on. Tennessee, Auburn played Tennessee pretty good in Knoxville, and that might be a much more interesting game in a neutral court. But I'd be interested to see how that game goes down because I think if Auburn could win that game, then that gives you a lot more thoughts about what they can do in March. And I would almost say, like, as an Auburn fan, what I would like to see is maybe for them to win that game and lose the next round game, just so that you can see, hey, we can beat a team like this, but maybe we're not losing all of our energy. I mean, I'd be fine either way if they made a run, but I would really like to see them beat Tennessee.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got a chance. I mean, the thing about Auburn versus Tennessee is Auburn does have, I think, a deeper team, more balanced team. As good as Connect is, there is a difference, like a big drop off between like the second best scorer. And I think that it's a situation on a lesser degree that Purdue has with Edie. It's kind of like they're overly reliant at times on Connect. And you look at some of these other teams in the SEC, especially Kentucky, they've got 3 or 4 guys that can make that last shot. Tennessee
Yeah.
just has one. And so I do think that's a cause for concern.
Yeah, I'm interested to see. It seems like I'm such a broken record, but right now I would put Kentucky as my favorite to win the SEC tournament, just like they have over half of the SEC tournaments that have ever been played. But they've been on just a tear at the end of the season. the young talent is really coming out to play right now. And as you mentioned, like there's talks that Reed Shepherd could be the number one overall pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah, I mean, with him and Dillingham and the other guys they have on that roster, I mean, to me, this feels like a Kentucky team that you kind of start to believe in. Maybe it's a Final Four team. Like they really seem like they have a chance.
Yeah, I mean, what blew me away is the way they beat Auburn during game day, and Kentucky didn't play a good game either. That's something right there when you can go on the road and play your C game and beat a top 10 team.
Mm-hmm. It really is. Like when I'm looking at like the national like bracket, I'm feeling like I really feel good about UConn. Feel pretty good about Houston after they just demolished Kansas last weekend. But I feel like Kentucky's kind of that other team. I'm starting to really kind of put them in that category.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we know that we can't believe in Purdue. I don't buy Marquette. Uh, I definitely think that Kentucky's a team that, yeah,
I
after
think
this
UNC
weekend,
has a good chance too.
yeah, UNC has a good chance. The only thing that worries me about UNC is how bad the ACC is right now. It's just you don't know how battle tested they are.
I think having Baycott and Davis with their experience from the tournament, I think that allows them to still be okay in the tournament.
I mean, yeah, they've had a lot of success in the tournament and been there a bunch. And I mean, hey, they made the championship game one year as an 8 seed with Baycott and Davis just 2 years ago. So you never want to count UNC out in the tournament, but that's always been years where the ACC was better. So I think that's going to be interesting. Right now, Joe, if I'm going to pick the tournament final, I'm going to say that it's going to be. I think Kentucky is going to play. I'm going to say Kentucky and Auburn play in the SEC tournament final, and I think Kentucky takes Auburn out.
I'm going to say it's Kentucky, Tennessee with chalk, but I'm going to say Kentucky wins it. They're going to beat them just like they did Saturday in Knoxville.
Well, sounds good. Well, we will check it out. We got an exciting rest of the tournament. Catch all of the episodes on Spotify, and of course, follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show, and of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.